She was a powerful CEO, used to saving companies until she collapsed mid-flight and was saved by a quiet man and his silent daughter. What happened next changed all three of them forever. The cabin hummed with the steady rhythm of altitude. It was one of those long-haul flights where time stretched thin, and people buried themselves in movies, headphones, or idle glances through oval windows framing endless clouds. Cassandra Blake sat in first class, a half-finished glass of champagne untouched on her tray table. Her laptop open but idle. Her eyes were fixed on the glowing screen, but her mind wasn't there. Her fingers trembled slightly as they hovered over the keyboard. Her assistant had uploaded the quarterly report 2 hours ago. She hadn't opened it. Every few seconds, she blinked as if to ground herself, her face pale under the subtle lighting of the cabin. To the passengers around her, she looked like any other overworked executive, overdressed for comfort and tired from travel. No one noticed the way her hand pressed against her ribs, just under her blazer. She shifted, trying to breathe deeply. She couldn't. Further down the aisle in economy, Marcus Thomas sat with his daughter Ava curled up beside him. She was quiet as always, her sketch pad resting on her knees. He glanced at her now and then, silently relieved by the calmness she found in drawing. Ever since the accident, her silence had become part of their daily rhythm, unnerving at times, but familiar. Marcus looked away from Ava and tried to rest his eyes, but the overhead call button chimed suddenly. A flurry of motion followed near the front. A flight attendant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Is there a doctor or nurse on board?" Marcus sat up, alert. Ava lifted her head. She hadn't heard urgency in anyone's voice in months, but now it wrapped around her like a thread pulling her forward. He stood without hesitation, quietly moving toward the front. Cassandra had collapsed against her seat. Her body slumped, her head lolled sideways. Her skin was gray. The flight attendant looked startled, unsure. Marcus crouched beside the unconscious woman, checking her pulse, then her breathing. "Low heart rate," he said, almost to himself. "She's dehydrated. Might be heart strain or a panic attack. Get oxygen. Now." The oxygen mask arrived. He lifted her head gently and secured it. The murmurs around them grew louder. Cassandra's eyes fluttered once, then closed again. Ava had followed him, unnoticed. She stood silently in the aisle, gripping her sketch pad, watching everything with wide, careful eyes. Her gaze wasn't on her father. It was on the woman. Something about her face, the sharpness beneath the pain, the kind of tiredness that went deeper than sleep, held Ava's attention. Minutes passed. Cassandra regained consciousness slowly, blinking against the light, disoriented. Marcus stayed by her side until she could speak, where she whispered, "What happened?" "You collapsed," he answered softly. "You're safe. You're on a flight to New York. Just rest." She blinked at him, confused, irritated, then ashamed. She tried to sit up, brushing his hand away. "I'm fine." Marcus gave her space, nodding. "Okay, but when we land, you need to see a doctor and drink water." She didn't respond. She looked away. He returned to his seat. Ava followed, but she kept turning back, eyes lingering. Cassandra didn't look at them again. She stared at the ceiling, her body stiff, pride intact. But something had cracked. Something had begun. The plane landed in the quiet gray of early morning. Passengers stirred to life with the usual rustling. Overhead bins slammed open, seat belts clicked, and small conversations resumed as if nothing unusual had happened. Cassandra Blake stepped off the plane with a practiced pace, shoulders square, chin high. She hadn't made eye contact with anyone. She didn't acknowledge the man who'd helped her, nor the little girl with the quiet eyes. Marcus didn't expect thanks. Years in emergency care had taught him that fear and pride often came dressed as silence. He held Ava's hand as they walked through the terminal, weaving through crowds, carrying only 2 backpacks and a worn-out stroller folded under his arm. Ava walked beside him, small and light and unusually still. She hadn't drawn anything since they left the plane. He glanced at her as they passed through the automatic doors into the cool city air. Her sketchpad was clutched tightly in her hands. "You good, baby?" he asked gently. Ava nodded, but didn't look up. It had been 8 months since she last spoke. Not since the rainy morning when a driver ran a red light and changed their lives forever. Ava had been in the back seat. Her mother had died instantly. Since then, Ava hadn't said a word. Not to her father, not to her teachers, not to the therapist he scraped together money to pay for. She only communicated through drawings, quiet, intricate things filled with emotions she never vocalized. That night, in the small apartment Marcus had borrowed from a friend for the week, Ava sat at the edge of the couch and finally opened her sketchpad. She began to draw. It wasn't the usual forest scene or a memory of her mother. She sketched the woman from the plane, Cassandra, though she didn't know her name. In Ava's version, the woman lay in her seat, surrounded by golden light. A soft halo of yellow glowed from behind her. Around the figure, Ava shaded small shadows, figures watching from a distance. And in the foreground, a man with calm eyes and steady hands knelt beside her. Marcus walked by and saw the sketch over her shoulder. He stopped. "That's her," he said quietly. Ava didn't respond, but her pencil kept moving. He sat beside her, not pushing, just watching. "She looked lonely," he said softly. "You saw that too." "Huh." Ava's pencil paused. She looked up, met his eyes just for a moment and nodded. Something passed between them. Not a word, but something whole and real. That night, after she went to bed, Marcus stayed up and thought about the woman, about the look in her eyes when she came to, the fear, the resistance, the way she wouldn't even say thank you. But most of all, he thought about Ava, and how, for the first time in a long time, she had drawn something alive, something that wasn't wrapped in sorrow. He didn't know it yet, but something had shifted inside her, something subtle. And in a city too big to notice quiet things, a silent little girl had begun, ever so gently, to wake up. Cassandra Blake awoke with a gasp. The hospital room was dim, the blinds half drawn, and the soft beeping of monitors marked the only sense of time. She sat upright too quickly. A sharp pain flared in her chest, and she cursed under her breath, grabbing at the IV taped to her arm. A nurse entered, young, kind-eyed. "Ms. Blake, you fainted on your flight yesterday. We had to transport you to Mount Sinai straight from the airport. You were severely dehydrated and showing signs of cardiac stress. You need rest." "I need my phone," Cassandra snapped, scanning the tray beside her. "Where is it?" The nurse didn't flinch. "In the drawer. Your assistant's been calling nonstop. I told her you were stable." Cassandra retrieved the phone and unlocked it. Over 30 missed calls, emails, a meeting reminder for 800 A.M. sharp. She was already 2 hours late. She pressed her temples with both hands, trying to will herself back into control. She couldn't afford to collapse. Not now. Not ever. The nurse spoke again, gently this time. This wasn't just exhaustion. "Miss Blake, your body's been holding something in too long. You should talk to someone, not just a doctor." Cassandra shot her a cold glance. "I have a therapist," but she didn't. Not anymore. Later that afternoon, Cassandra was discharged. She refused the wheelchair and walked out on her own, high heels clicking sharply down the hospital corridor. A car waited for her at the curb. Inside the luxury sedan, she stared blankly out the window. The city passed by in blurred motion. But she wasn't watching the buildings or traffic. She was replaying the moment on the plane, the panic, the helplessness, in the face of the man who had helped her. He hadn't asked for anything. He hadn't even looked impressed. And then there was the girl, quiet, wide-eyed, holding a sketch pad like a lifeline. The memory unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. When she arrived at the hotel, Cassandra declined help from the bellhop and went straight to her suite. The city stretched beneath her window, but she didn't admire the view. She poured a glass of water, sat at the edge of the bed, and stared at her reflection in the darkened TV screen. Everything was starting to slip. She opened her suitcase, searching for something buried at the bottom. A photo frame wrapped in fabric. She hesitated, then unwrapped it. A picture of her and her sister taken when they were teenagers, barefoot in their mother's garden. It was the last photo before everything fell apart, before their mother walked out, before their father's grip grew violent. She hadn't seen her sister in years, only heard her voice in voicemails she never returned. But yesterday's collapse had stirred something. It wasn't just her heart that had buckled. It was the silence, the pressure, the years of pretending she didn't need anyone. And for a brief moment on that plane, when she was unconscious and defenseless, a stranger had seen her. Not the CEO, not the powerhouse, just her. She didn't even know his name, but she remembered the steadiness in his voice, in the girl's eyes. Cassandra lay back against the pillows and closed her eyes, not to sleep, but to breathe. For the first time in years, she didn't feel strong, but maybe that wasn't the worst thing. The morning after her discharge, Cassandra sat at the hotel desk, staring at the open laptop. The screen was filled with data points, marketing projections, and a blinking cursor waiting for input. But her hands stayed motionless on the keyboard. Her assistant had rescheduled her meetings. A junior executive was covering for her on a call with a billion-dollar partner. Everything was under control, or at least, that was what everyone kept telling her. She didn't feel in control, not anymore. The bottle of water on her desk was still full. She'd been meaning to drink it, like she'd been meaning to return her sister's calls. She reached for her phone, intending to scroll mindlessly, to drown in emails, anything to avoid thinking too deeply. But the voicemail icon blinked. One new message. She tapped it. Her sister's voice came through, raspy and low-cast. I know you don't want to hear from me, but Dad died. The words settled like dust across the room, quiet and inescapable. Her sister continued. He had cancer. He didn't tell anyone until it was too late. The funeral's next week, in Jersey. I know you probably won't come, but I thought you should know. Also, he left a will. You're in it. Cassandra didn't move. Cass, the voice repeated softly. I'm sorry, I really am. The message ended. She sat still for a long time, as if moving would shatter the strange calm blanketing her. Then suddenly, the air changed. Her shoulders stiffened, her jaw locked. She stood and crossed the room, digging through her suitcase. She pulled out a scarf, a blouse then, at the very bottom, a small velvet box. She hadn't touched it in years. Inside was an old key. It opened the drawer of a desk back in Connecticut, in her childhood home. The same desk where her mother used to write poems. The same one her father had tried to burn the day after her mother left. The key had somehow survived. Cassandra had taken it the day she fled. She was 16. She closed the box. Suddenly, the air felt thinner. She walked to the balcony and pushed open the glass door. New York's morning noise flooded in horns, sirens, people yelling to be heard. But up on the 30th floor, it all felt distant. She leaned on the railing. Her mind wandered back to the man on the plane. His voice had been calm, unhurried, like someone who had seen pain and knew how to sit with it. He had looked at her like she wasn't a problem to solve. And the girl, Ava, the way she had watched, not out of fear, but something else. Understanding, maybe. Cassandra didn't realize she was crying until the tears hit her wrist. She didn't make a sound, just breathed slowly, letting herself break quietly, where no one could see. There had been too many years of silence, too many days of wearing armor made of status and deadlines. But grief didn't care about power. It came when it wanted. And it came for her now, heavy and long overdue. Inside, her phone buzzed with new notifications, messages, meetings, demands. She didn't answer. She sat on the balcony floor, knees pulled to her chest, and watched the city move without her. And for once, she let it. The afternoon sun filtered through the branches of Central Park, casting soft golden patterns across the ground. It was the kind of light that made everything look gentler than it really was. Marcus sat on a weathered bench near the pond, his arms resting on his knees as he watched Ava crouch by the water's edge. She was sketching again, calm, focused, and almost peaceful. There had been a shift in her over the past few days, small but visible. She was drawing more, eating without coaxing, looking at people instead of away from them. Marcus didn't question it. He knew better than to force meaning onto things. But he noticed, especially after the plane, across the park. Cassandra walked slowly, sunglasses on, coffee in hand, trying to keep her mind still. Her assistant had begged her to return to the office, even just virtually. She'd said no for the first time in years. She had no appetite for work. She wasn't sure why she had come to the park, only that her feet had taken her there, maybe hoping that movement would soothe the thoughts that kept circling back to her father's voice, her sister's voicemail, and the quiet girl's eyes. As she turned a corner, she saw them. At first, she didn't recognize Marcus. He wasn't in his nurse's uniform. He was in jeans and a dark blue hoodie, relaxed, natural, quietly watching the girl who was still kneeling, head bent over her sketch pad. It was Ava she noticed first, her hand moving in quick, fluid lines. Then she saw the sketch pad and the face that turned, slightly, toward her. Their eyes met. Ava froze. Cassandra stopped walking. Her breath caught in her throat, not from panic, but surprise. Ava stood, slowly, and walked toward her. Marcus noticed too late. He stood up, ready to call her back, but paused when he saw the expression on his daughter's face. It wasn't fear. It was intention. Ava held out the sketch pad with both hands. Cassandra hesitated, then stepped closer and looked down. It was a drawing of her, not the version from the plane, weak and unconscious. This version stood tall, surrounded by soft lines and light. There was something gentle in the way Ava had drawn her, like she wasn't broken, just human. Cassandra stared at it, stunned. "She saw you," Marcus said quietly from behind. "I think she sees a lot more than people realize." Cassandra turned slowly to look at him. "I remember you. From the plane." "I remember you too," he said, "though I wasn't sure we'd ever cross paths again." She handed the sketch pad back to Ava, who didn't take it. She pushed it gently into Cassandra's hands and stepped back. "She wants you to keep it," Marcus explained. Cassandra blinked hard, her throat tightening. She'd been given million-dollar contracts and awards, but never something like this, a child's silent offering, made without obligation or transaction. "Thank you," she whispered. Ava didn't reply, but she smiled. It was small and fleeting, but real. "Would you like to sit?" Marcus asked. Cassandra hesitated. She should have said no. She had a conference call in less than an hour. Emails piling up. A corporate machine waiting for her to return. But she looked at Ava, then at the bench, and she nodded. They sat together under the dappled trees, the city humming just beyond the park's edge. For the first time in a very long while, Cassandra didn't feel like she had to be anywhere else. The sky had shifted into a soft orange by the time they rose from the bench. Cassandra didn't know how long they had sat there. Long enough for the silence to grow comfortable. Long enough for the tension in her shoulders to settle into something close to stillness. Ava had continued sketching, seated cross-legged on the grass, eyes flitting from the swans to the sky to Cassandra's face, then back to her paper. She never spoke, but she didn't need to. The way she handed over each drawing, one of the pond, one of the trees, one of Cassandra with a half smile, felt like conversation in its own quiet rhythm. As they walked toward the park's edge, Cassandra hesitated. She didn't want to admit it, but she wasn't ready to go back to the hotel, not to the cold room, not to the echoing voicemail that still haunted her ears. "You hungry?" Marcus asked, casually, almost like he hadn't planned the question. Cassandra blinked. "I may be. There's a diner a few blocks from here. Nothing fancy, but the food's warm and the people don't ask questions. You're welcome to join us." She looked at Ava, who had already turned slightly in that direction, like she knew the answer before it was spoken. "All right," Cassandra said. "Just for a bit." The diner was small and tucked between a laundromat and a shoe repair shop. It smelled like coffee and grilled onions, and the waitress greeted Marcus like an old friend. "Hey, stranger." "The usual table." "Yeah," he smiled. "And an extra menu, if you don't mind." The waitress raised an eyebrow as she looked at Cassandra, then nodded. "Nice to see you with company." They sat in a corner booth. Marcus ordered pancakes for Ava and a chicken sandwich for himself. Cassandra studied the menu longer than necessary before choosing the simplest thing she could: scrambled eggs and toast. When the food arrived, Ava ate without needing to be reminded. She didn't pick or push her food around like she often did at home. She just ate. Marcus noticed, and so did Cassandra. He didn't say anything, but the glance they exchanged said it all. Halfway through the meal, Cassandra leaned back in her seat. "You're a nurse," she said. "You knew exactly what to do." "Yeah, I work in a trauma ward," Marcus replied. "Long shifts, unpredictable hours, but it keeps us going." She studied him. "You're calm, even when everything's falling apart." He shrugged. "I've had practice." There was a pause, not awkward, just honest. "And Ava?" she asked gently. Marcus looked at his daughter, who was now doodling on a napkin. She hasn't spoken in 8 months, since the day her mom died. It was a car accident. Fast. Sudden. She was in the back seat and survived without a scratch, but something inside her just went quiet. Cassandra swallowed. "I'm sorry." "Me too," he said. "But she's alive, and I'll take silence over losing her any day." Cassandra nodded, then looked down at her half-eaten eggs. "I lost my mother too. Not to death. She left when I was 14. One day she was packing lunch. The next she was gone. No goodbye. No warning." Marcus didn't speak, just listened. It felt strange, unfamiliar to share something that private without needing to wrap it in armor or business language. I spent most of my life trying not to feel that, she added, trying to be too busy, too successful, too untouchable. Has it worked? Cassandra paused, then looked at him. No. The check arrived, but neither of them rushed. Ava finished her drawing and slid it quietly across the table toward Cassandra. It was a sketch of the three of them sitting in the booth, smiling softly under the warm diner lights. The details were simple, but tender. Cassandra's throat tightened. May I keep it? Ava nodded. When they stepped out into the night air, Cassandra turned to Marcus. Thank you for dinner and everything else. He offered a quiet smile. It's nothing. You look like someone who just needed to sit still for a while. She looked at him, her voice low. It's been years since I let myself do that. He didn't press her, didn't ask what came next. But as Cassandra watched Ava climb onto the low wall beside the sidewalk, arms out like wings, she felt something new press against her chest, a quiet longing to stay. The next morning, Cassandra found herself walking, not with purpose, not toward a meeting, but simply walking. The streets felt different somehow, not because the city had changed, but because something inside her had. She hadn't returned to the office, hadn't responded to the assistant's increasingly frantic texts. She had silenced the calls. For once, the silence felt necessary. Later that afternoon, she found herself standing outside a modest brick building with a faded blue awning. The windows were filled with splashes of children's artwork, finger-painted suns, stick figures holding hands, bright skies. It was the community art center Marcus had mentioned in passing during dinner. Ava took classes there sometimes, he'd said. She didn't know why her feet brought her there. Only that being near Ava had done something to her, reached something untouched since childhood, inside. The hum of children laughing and brushes clinking in water jars filled the space. Cassandra stood at the doorway, unsure. Then she saw Ava. She was seated at the back, alone at a small table, her hands deep in color, her eyes locked onto a canvas. Her concentration was absolute. And then she looked up and saw her. Ava smiled, not wide, but real. She waved, then gestured to an empty chair beside her. Cassandra moved toward it slowly, feeling out of place, overdressed, and slightly exposed. But she sat. Ava didn't speak. She simply slid a blank piece of paper toward her and offered her a brush. Cassandra hesitated, then dipped the brush into blue and dragged it across the paper. For the next few minutes, they painted together. No word, just color, quiet understanding. Marcus arrived not long after, surprised to find Cassandra already there. She invited me, Cassandra said, glancing at Ava. With her eyes, Marcus chuckled. Yeah, she has that way. They watched Ava paint for a moment. Then Cassandra spoke, her voice softer than he'd ever heard it. I never got to say goodbye to my mother. She said, she left one morning before school, just disappeared. She sent a postcard 6 months later from Arizona. No return address. Said she needed to save herself before she drowned. My father burned the postcard in the sink. Marcus remained quiet. He was never the same after she left. Angry, controlling, violent. Sometimes, my sister and I, she paused. We split. I ran the first chance I got. She stayed. I haven't spoken to her in almost a decade. Marcus leaned against the doorway, arms crossed loosely. You never look back, I couldn't, she admitted. Looking back meant feeling everything I'd spent years trying to bury. He nodded slowly, and now Cassandra glanced at Ava. who was humming softly to herself as she painted a row of trees. "Now," she said, "I'm not sure burying it worked." They stood in silence, the kind that held weight but no judgment. Then Cassandra asked, "Why are you so calm?" Marcus smiled faintly. "I learned that pain has its own timetable. You can't rush it, can't negotiate with it. You just have to make space for it. And if you're lucky, someone will sit in that space with you for a while." Cassandra looked at him, something unspoken settling in her chest. Maybe it wasn't about fixing things. Maybe it was about allowing them to be seen. She picked up the sketch Ava had left behind on the table, a new one, drawn in charcoal. 3 figures, again, this time standing in a field under a tree. There was no color, just lines. But those lines were strong, rooted. "Do you think she'll speak again?" Cassandra asked. Marcus's eyes softened. "I don't know," he said, "but I think she's already started." Cassandra held the drawing gently, as if it might crumble. For the first time in a long, long time, she felt the ache of something she couldn't name. It wasn't regret. It was hope. It was a Sunday afternoon when it happened, quiet and unassuming. The kind of moment most people would have overlooked. The community center had organized an open studio day. Children moved in and out of the sunlit space, painting, sculpting, laughing with the ease only children seemed to carry. Parents sat on folding chairs, sipping coffee from paper cups. There was music playing faintly in the background, something old, slow, familiar. Cassandra sat near the back with a sketchbook on her lap, not drawing, just turning pages slowly. She had come without being asked. It was becoming a habit, a quiet one. No fanfare, no declarations. Ava was nearby, painting at her usual table. She wore her favorite oversized hoodie, sky blue with fading stars. Her hands were streaked with color. Cassandra didn't notice the shift at first. She was distracted, caught somewhere between a memory of her mother and the unread messages waiting on her phone. Then she heard it, a whisper, soft, barely audible, but unmistakably a voice. "You looked lonely." Cassandra blinked and turned her head. Ava stood beside her, holding out a new drawing, a watercolor of Cassandra, sitting alone on a bench beneath a tree. The expression Ava had painted on her face wasn't one of sadness, but solitude. A woman surrounded by the world, yet untouched by it. Cassandra's breath caught in her throat. She reached up, touched Ava's hand. "What did you say?" Ava met her eyes. "You look lonely," she repeated, her voice faint but steady. The room didn't stop, but for Cassandra, everything else faded. Marcus had heard it too. He stood frozen across the room, coffee in hand, eyes wide. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He knew if he did, he might break the spell. Cassandra knelt beside Ava, tears already gathering. "I did," she whispered. Ava didn't flinch. She didn't shrink away. She simply nodded, then pointed to the drawing again. "You don't look like that now." The words were few, halting, but they were words. Real words. Marcus finally stepped forward, his voice trembling, barely audible. "Baby, you talked." Ava turned toward him, suddenly shy. Her lips curved into a small smile. She stepped into his arms, and for the first time in nearly a year, he held her while her voice, tiny and new, found its way into the world again. Later that day, the three of them sat on a park bench, the same one from days before. The trees had begun to shift into early autumn gold. Ava sat between them, swinging her legs, holding Cassandra's hand without explanation or hesitation. Cassandra looked up at the sky, then at Marcus. "You know, when I collapsed on that plane, I thought it was the worst thing that could happen to me. I thought it was a sign I was losing everything. And now Marcus asked. She glanced down at Ava, who had rested her head gently on Cassandra's shoulder. Now I think it might have been the start of something I didn't know I needed. Marcus nodded. Some things break so something else can open. Cassandra smiled, tired but full. For the first time, her strength didn't come from holding everything together, but from letting someone in. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but today, a little girl had spoken, a man had listened, and she had let herself feel, and that more than anything felt like coming home. The next week brought the kind of stillness Cassandra hadn't known in years. She stayed in the city longer than planned, extended her hotel reservation without checking with anyone, and let her phone stay on silent most of the day. Her assistant flooded her inbox with updates, board members asking when she'd return, a shareholder growing nervous, legal needing her approval on a document she hadn't read. But Cassandra didn't reply. Not yet. Instead, she walked more, visited the art center, had coffee with Marcus on a park bench while Ava painted nearby. There was a rhythm forming, slow, quiet, rooted in the kind of simplicity that had never existed in her world before. But it couldn't last forever. One crisp morning, Cassandra arrived early at the diner they'd visited before, hoping to surprise Marcus and Ava. The waitress recognized her and led her to a corner booth with a view of the street. She had barely sat down when a man approached from another table, older, balding, wearing a rumpled suit and carrying a newspaper. "Excuse me," he said, lowering the paper to reveal Cassandra's face on the front page. "You're Cassandra Blake, right, CEO of Alaris International." She froze. He smiled, unbothered by her tension. "Didn't expect to see you here. Thought you'd be in Dubai this week, or Davos, wherever people like you go to change the world." Before she could answer, Marcus stepped through the door with Ava, stopping short at the scene. The man looked at Marcus, then back at Cassandra, then gave a little smirk. "Didn't expect to see you with regular people either." Cassandra stood slowly. "Sir, I'm trying to have breakfast with my friends. Please excuse us." He held up his hands as stepping away, but the tone had already shifted. Marcus looked at her, eyes narrowed slightly. "Is it true?" She nodded, swallowing hard. "Yes, I'm the CEO of Alaris." He exhaled and sat down with Ava, who was already sketching on a napkin again, unaware or perhaps unfazed by the exchange. "Why didn't you say anything?" he asked gently. Cassandra sat, suddenly feeling as though the space around her had shrunk. "Because I didn't want to be that version of myself around you. The public version. The one who wins awards and smiles for photos and gives TED Talks on resilience while never sleeping more than 4 hours a night. And who are you now?" She met his gaze, surprised by how much the question hurt. "I don't know," she said. "Maybe I'm someone who finally stopped running." He nodded slowly. "You could have told me. I wasn't going to ask for anything." "I know," she said. "That's exactly why I didn't want to lose this, whatever this is." They sat in silence. The clatter of plates and the smell of coffee filled the space between them. Ava held up her napkin. A new drawing, this one of Cassandra, but different. No blazer, no power heels, just a woman sitting cross-legged in the grass, barefoot, with her eyes closed and a faint smile on her lips. Cassandra stared at it, tears pressing at the corners of her eyes. "I think that's who you are," Marcus said softly. "That version, the one she sees." For the rest of the meal, they didn't talk much, but something had shifted again, not in a way that pulled them apart, but in a way that made everything more real. Later, As Cassandra walked Ava home from the art center, the little girl slipped her hand into Cassandra's without asking. "Will you be here tomorrow?" Ava asked. Cassandra paused. The question held so much weight. "Yes," she said, her voice steady. "I will," because for once, she wasn't chasing anything. She was simply choosing to stay. Cassandra stood at the window of her hotel suite, watching the morning light spill between buildings. The city was already awake, horns blaring, people rushing, the world spinning fast as always. Her phone buzzed again. 30 unread messages, calendar alerts, her assistant's voice in a voicemail saying, "You're going to lose control of the board if you don't return soon." Cassandra didn't listen to the rest. Instead, she opened her laptop and drafted a single email. "To the Alaris board, I'm stepping away indefinitely. I will not be attending the shareholders meeting next week. The company is in good hands. Trust the team. Cassandra Blake." She clicked send, just like that. No fanfare, no apology, no justification. And then she closed the laptop. Later that day, she walked into the community arts center with 2 coffees in hand and a reusable grocery bag full of brushes and paints. Marcus looked up from where he was helping the children clean paint trays. "Didn't expect to see you this early," he said. "I'm not going back," she replied simply. "To your company," she nodded. He studied her face, tired. Yes, but not hollow like before. Something inside had settled. "I used to think if I stepped away, everything would collapse," she admitted. "But I'm realizing now it already was. I just didn't want to see it." And now he asked, "Now, I want to build something that doesn't require me to disappear to keep it standing." He smiled at her, not out of surprise, but respect. Cassandra rolled up her sleeves and joined the kids at the tables. She wasn't there as a guest anymore. She was simply part of it. She and Ava painted together in quiet focus. They didn't need to speak much anymore. Ava's voice had returned gently, cautiously, like a bird testing its wings after a long winter. Later that afternoon, Cassandra sat with the center's director. She asked about funding, curriculum, space. By evening, she'd written a check large enough to expand the program across the city. No press release, no branding, just an anonymous donation. She didn't need her name on a building. She needed to be part of something that healed, not just succeeded. That night, Marcus invited her over for dinner. It wasn't anything special, just baked chicken, rice, and roasted vegetables. But to Cassandra, it felt sacred. Ava helped set the table, humming softly, and when she placed Cassandra's plate in front of her, she said, "Your family now." The words hit Cassandra in a place deeper than memory, past her childhood, past the loneliness, past the years she had taught herself not to hope for that kind of belonging. After dinner, they sat on the couch, the 3 of them. Ava leaned against Cassandra's side, half asleep, a sketchbook resting on her lap. "I used to think I had to outrun everything to survive," Cassandra whispered. "Now I know. I just needed somewhere I could finally stop." Marcus turned to her. "You found it." She nodded. She had, not in boardrooms or jet-lag flights or quarterly reports, but in a small apartment filled with warmth, in the laughter of a child, in the silence between brushstrokes. For the first time in years, Cassandra Blake had chosen not to rise higher. She had chosen to stay. The lawyer's office in Jersey smelled like dust and old leather. Cassandra sat on one side of a long oak table, her posture straight, but her fingers curled tightly around a cup of untouched coffee. Across from her sat her sister, Elena, hair shorter now, eyes more guarded than she remembered. They hadn't spoken face to face in over 9 years. The silence between them wasn't loud. It was exhausted. Elena glanced at her, then looked away. Didn't think you'd come. I didn't think I would either, Cassandra replied. The lawyer, a thin man in his 60s with a patient voice, began reading their father's will. Most of it was procedural debts, property, legal language Cassandra barely heard. But one sentence landed heavy to my daughters. Cassandra and Elena Blake. I leave the house and all its contents to be decided between them, as I failed to do right by either. There was a pause. Elena scoffed under her breath. He writes one honest thing in his entire life, and it's after he's dead. Cassandra didn't answer. She kept her eyes on the will, but her thoughts drifted. Back to the night her mother left. Back to the shouting. Back to the bruises no one talked about. She had never visited the house since. Not once. After the reading, Elena stood and gathered her things. I don't want it, she said. The house, the furniture, the memories. You can take it, burn it, tear it down. Doesn't matter to me. Cassandra stood too. Maybe it does, she said gently. Elena paused at the door, her voice quieter now. You were gone, Cass. I stayed. I cleaned up after him. I gave up my music school scholarship to work 2 jobs and keep the lights on. I needed you. Cassandra swallowed hard. I know. Do you? Elena asked, eyes fierce with pain. Cassandra didn't have an answer, only regret. Back at the house that evening, Cassandra walked the creaking floorboards alone. The walls hadn't changed, same wallpaper, same cold quietness. In the study, she found the old desk, her mother's. She unlocked it with the key she'd carried for 2 decades. Inside, everything was as it had been: dried ink bottles, scattered pages, a worn notebook. She opened it carefully. The first page read, in delicate handwriting, to my daughters, if you're reading this, it means you survived him. I pray that means you'll survive yourselves too. Cassandra's breath caught. She read every page, word after word of a woman who had left not because she didn't care, but because she was breaking. It didn't erase the pain, but it shifted something. Her mother hadn't abandoned them. She had fled in hope that one day her daughters would understand. Cassandra took the notebook and left the house behind. The next day, she stood on a small stage at the community center, facing a modest crowd of children, parents, and volunteers. Marcus stood near the back, Ava beside him holding a sketchbook against her chest. Cassandra cleared her throat. I was given something recently, an inheritance. A house. Yes, but more than that. A truth I had spent years avoiding. She held up the notebook. My mother used to write poems at a desk I thought was long gone. In one of them, she wrote, there is no greater freedom than when you finally stop hiding from yourself. She looked at Ava, then at Marcus. I'm using that inheritance to start something new, a foundation for young artists, especially those living through trauma, neglect, or grief, a place where they can tell their stories before the silence eats them alive. Applause was quiet, respectful, but the smile Ava gave her was louder than anything. Cassandra stepped down, heart thudding, not from nerves but from relief. She wasn't just letting go of the past. She was redeeming it. The community center buzzed with quiet joy that afternoon. Sunlight filtered in through high windows, casting soft patterns across walls covered in children's artwork. Beneath a banner that read, "Art is where healing begins," laughter and stories wove gently through the room. Cassandra stood near the corner, helping hang one of Ava's newest pieces. It was a vibrant landscape, warm reds, calm blues, a winding path leading to a tree. Marcus approached with 2 cups of lemonade, offering one with a smile. That tree's in the park, he said, nodding toward the painting. The one you were sitting under the day we met again. Cassandra smiled. She remembers everything. She sees everything. Marcus replied. Nearby, Ava sat cross-legged on the floor with a few younger kids, showing them how to blend colors with soft brushes. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, her cheeks smudged with green and yellow paint. She looked finally like a child again. As the day wound down, Ava quietly approached Cassandra with a folded piece of paper. She held it close, almost shyly, then placed it in Cassandra's hands and whispered, "It's for you." Cassandra slowly unfolded the drawing. This one was different. It wasn't stylized or distant. It wasn't built around metaphors or imagined scenes. It was a portrait of the three of them. Cassandra, sitting on a couch, a book in hand. Marcus beside her, laughing mid-sentence. And Ava between them, leaning against Cassandra's side, her eyes half closed in peace. There was no title, but scrawled at the bottom in soft pencil, Ava had written a single word: family. Cassandra's hand trembled slightly as she held the sketch to her chest. Her throat tightened, but she didn't cry, not out of restraint, but out of wholeness. Marcus saw it and stepped closer. "She's been working on that all week," he said quietly. "She told me she wanted to surprise you." Cassandra nodded, unable to speak. Later that evening, the three of them walked home together under the warm orange of the setting sun. Ava held both their hands, swinging between them, giggling as the breeze tugged at her hoodie. They passed by a small bakery, and Marcus paused. "You know," he said, "we could make this a tradition. Walks, dinners, art nights. Us." Cassandra looked at him, then at Ava, who was already nodding enthusiastically. "I'd like that," she said, "not as a visitor, not as an outsider, but as someone who had finally stopped running." Weeks later, the foundation Cassandra established opened its first full-time art therapy program. No reporters were invited, no press releases sent, but the walls of the center were soon covered with bold, raw, beautiful pieces from children who had found their voice. And in the center of the main hall, framed simply, hung Ava's drawing, the one that said family. Visitors asked about it sometimes, and Cassandra would smile and say, "That one changed everything," because it did, not just for her, not just for Ava, but for anyone who's ever believed they were too broken to begin again. In the end, it wasn't power or control or legacy that saved her. It was kindness. It was connection. It was the gentle courage of a child's hand offering hers in the dark. And it was saying yes to a life that didn't need to be perfect, just real.